I will focus on Ghana's quest for restitution of objects that the country can lay claim to as being looted or taken away illicitly from the geopolitical area, particularly from the 19th century onwards. The word restitution here, we have different definitions, but it's about a restoration or return of something that has been lost or stolen to its proper lawful or rightful, to the lawful or rightful owner. But in our case here, we deem it that we cannot separate restitution from reparation. And reparation here, we also mean restoring to good condition, something that has been damaged. So in our case, we are thinking about the damage that was caused to us Africans when our cultural objects were taken away illicitly from the continent. Both terms, restitution and reparation, have elements of rectification and compensation. Now, when we talk about compensation, I'll discuss that further in the presentation. Well, in our case, we realize that restitution is a developing term. We are yet to fully conceptualize what we mean by restitution, but we see it as part of the process of decolonization, and it's a gradual process that requires tact and patience, as it entails power play between holders of the objects and the owners of the objects. A brief background to what we mean by restitution, or the quest for restitution in Ghana. Collecting of cultural objects was part of the colonial enterprise in our part of the world. It was closely linked to the establishment of museums, archives, botanical gardens, and zoos. African museums have been actively engaged in the process of collecting looted and illicitly trafficked objects, in addition to genuinely acquired items. Collecting was done by researchers, including anthropologists and archaeologists, missionaries, miners, government officials, and soldiers, among others, through blackmail, coercion, exploitation, subjugation, and warfare. Collecting has been associated with power relations and suppression of critical history. Keeping an export of collections have disconnected Africans from their past and denied us the opportunity to learn from and build upon the past, to have a positive future imaginaries and to have positive future imaginaries and plans. The case for restitution in Ghana, Ghana is still in the process of laying claim to specific objects, and we do not know the volume, the quantum of objects that have been taken and stored in museums across Western Europe. I mean, Western Europe, it includes the Americas and European and various European nations. We do not know exactly what they have. So how can we lay claim to them? We need to have an inventory of what there is, and then also participate in determining what we want to receive on the continent. So far, objects are being returned. They've been returned to Benin and other nations piecemeal. But these are objects that have been returned, although we say agitation by various stakeholders from the continent and beyond. But we think that we should be part of the decision regarding what exactly we want to have back on the continent, rather than our neighbors who have custody of those objects saying, this is what we want to bring to you, and we are bringing you this. Okay, so we are yet to lay claim and prepare our claim for that. But we also need those objects back, because we believe that getting the objects back will help us to reconceptualize, that is to redefine and to represent ourselves from our own perspective. It is said that who tells your story defines who you are. And the African story so far, in terms of history, in terms of all that is known globally about Africa, has been not by Africans mainly, but by scholars, mainly from the colonial period to the present, who have done some work across Africa. So our story has been told mainly by non-Africans from their own perspective, from this power relational perspective. So there's a need to produce and disseminate knowledge today that will re-educate, attract, and inspire a cross-section of Ghanaians, and for that matter, Africans, and their neighbors of the world about Africa and Africans. There's need for us to have a new way of seeing as a people. So far, through the formal Western education that we adopted, much of our way of seeing is clouded by Western European value systems, Western European philosophical underpinnings. So there's need for us to rethink who we are and reconceptualize ourselves. Some of the reasons why we need those objects back. Now, what have been the efforts at restitution so far in our part of the world? I know that there has been negotiation between Ghana and the British government, for example, for the return of a ceremonial Asante stool that British soldiers looted in a war between Britain and Asante in 1874. There's also been collaboration between the Ghanaian government and the chiefs of Ahanta, that is along the west coast of Ghana, in 2008 for the return by the Dutch government of the head of a king, Nana Bedu Bonsu, who the Dutch in 1838 executed. We can go into details about why he was executed and what went thereafter. We are told that 2 Dutch citizens were killed along the coast, and as punishment, the Dutch administration at that time ordered that the king be arrested. And it was claimed that the king was the one who ordered the execution of those 2 Dutch merchants. And so the king himself was executed and his head was severed off. Thereafter, all the villages along the coast belonging to the Ahanta people were burnt down and many objects were taken away. So there was negotiation for the head in particular to be returned. What about private? That was at the national level. The private and community efforts. We have a film that was made by one Ne Kwate Owo in the 1970s. It was a documentary which he prepared based on images he took at the British Museum. And this documentary is called You Hide Me. It's based on the collections that the British Museum is keeping and the need for their restitution. In 1974, the then king of Asante, Tumfo Opokuware, also called for the return of Asante objects that were in 1874 and 1900 plundered and looted by British soldiers. Well, 3 years after his call, 3 to 4 years after his call, the same king was invited to the United Kingdom to participate in an exhibition of Asante objects that were taken by the British. And that situation is quite murky, and many people were not happy that the king, after calling for the return of objects, would participate in that particular ceremony. In 2009, the new king of Asante, Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, also reiterated the earlier call by the Asante chief. We are also aware that another group of people, Akpini Traditional Council, that's on the eastern part of Ghana, which used to be part of German Togoland, also requested Germany to return objects that were seized by the general German colonial administration. So those were some of the efforts. Now the success stories is that include the fact that in 1935, the British returned the golden stool, which British officials had seized in 1900 after annexing Asante as a colony by conquest and deporting the Asante king at the time, Ajiman Prempeh I, to Seychelles. So The success is that the golden stool was returned. Now, it's still debatable whether the original golden stool is the one that was returned or a replica was what was returned. But, well, the golden stool symbolizes Asante power and unity. And so, so far, we accept the fact that it has been returned. Now, in 1985, the British also returned a ceremonial Asante stool, and it's being kept by the Ghana National Museum. In 2009, the Dutch returned to Ghana the severed head of King Bonsu, Bedu Bonsu of Ahanta. And that is also a major thing that the people of Ahanta cherish so much, because it's like once you take the head away, you've defeated the people. But once the head is brought back, the symbolism is that the people have regained their independence and their power from the Dutch. Now, we have the return of some private collections to Asante by a British family. We are yet to identify the family and where the objects are today. Also, some private collections were returned by a Swiss family to the Ghana National Museum. Some of the pertinent issues that we have today is developing a restitution and reparation strategy. What will be the methodology for pursuing this? Then locating and developing an inventory of inappropriately collected cultural objects abroad and in Ghana. What we mean is we are aware that even within Ghana, we have a number of objects that were inappropriately collected and looted, and they are still there. The mining companies have some of them, constructional firms of various kinds have objects, and then we have private collectors that have these objects. So when we talk about restitution, we are not limiting it only to what we have in Europe, but also what is within the continent and within the geopolitical area of Ghana. We realize that there's need for us to collaborate and partner with other African nations. We should have bilateral and multilateral partnership, in addition to advocacy groups, art dealers, local communities, and other stakeholders to ensure collectivism in restitution and reparation affairs. Because when we deal with small communities, each settlement or a particular area asking for return of objects, or even if one nation keeps demanding objects, we are just re-emphasizing the colonial thing where the continent was subdivided to weaken us. But when we have a common voice, that would enhance our quest for restitution, because after all, when some of those objects were taken, they were not limited to specific areas. And we are also aware as ethnographers and archaeologists that in many cases, objects travel faster than people. And some of those objects may be produced in one community, but used in another community. So the fact that they were taken from Ghana, what we call Ghana today, does not mean that they were restricted or limited to Ghana. We have similar objects across the sub-region. So we need a collective voice to demand these objects back, and we should be supporting each nation that makes such a claim. We also need to build capacity, human and technical resource development, very important in this enterprise. We need to have public outreach to assess and deepen public understanding of the value of cultural objects to be restituted and the essence of restitution and reparation. Now, let me repeat that. We may be clamoring over restitution, but if the public in Africa does not understand the value of the objects that have been taken away, then they may be back, and they may back, but the effect, the net effect, will not be much felt. At the same time, if the public does not understand the importance of getting the objects back, they may come back through one door and leave the continent through the other door. And so we have to embark on public outreach to assess and deepen understanding so that when these objects come back, we will know, we have a collective voice in how to conserve them, where to keep them, and how to make them accessible to a cross-section of people. So I should say that those are, in a nutshell, where we are with the exercise of restitution. But we believe strongly that it is an important, very important endeavor for us today in Africa. I mentioned earlier on, and will reiterate, that the objects that have been taken are part and parcel of the souls of the various communities in which they function, because you cannot detach the material component of life from the religious, that is to say, the cognitive structures, from the social components of people's life ways in Africa. They're part and parcels of our lives. So giving us political freedom, and then we claim we have independence, and yet the objects that made so much meaning to us in terms of spiritualism, our spiritual aspect of our lives, in terms of our social components of life, formal and informal organization, how we interconnected, building or enforcing and reinforcing, fostering interpersonal relations among us. And those objects have been taken away. How do we learn about our history? Today, we don't want to depend on what we term as official history alone. The official history has been prepared for us, and that is what we have consumed from kindergarten through the tertiary institution. And that is what has clouded our minds, okay, and tied us to Europe. We want to shift a little bit from that to engage in what we may refer to as public history, history that is out there in the streets, history that is out there in various communities, in various settlements, which have not been documented by the authorized authorities, including me speaking, those of us here who they can claim we have the letters and we have the skills to document history. But there are people out there with a lot of information that can be added to what has already been documented in order to have our history a holistic one that will not be one-sided, because the history so far has not helped. Much of our history has been a history of violence, a history of separation of groups, a history that actually divides us rather than unites us. We want the objects back to reinterpret them in ways that would foster social cohesion and enhance harmony and sustainable peace across the continent, and then heal wounds between Africans and then our neighbors of the world, and make the world a better place for all of us to live. Thank you very much.